Hey, welcome back. So we left off after installing the AdventureWorks sample database, but we still really haven't talked a lot about what databases even are, how they're organized, and how to use SQL Server Management Studio to explore a database. So that's kind of going to be the focus of this lecture. I apologize in advance for the extremely unfortunate pun that is the title of this slide, Data Basics, groan. But I kind of felt like it was appropriate given that in this video we're going to talk about the very basics of databases and how to navigate them. So try to forgive me for that, and we'll move on to the next slide. So what even is a database? What is the definition of a database? I figured I'd go to somebody who'd be an authority. You figure the Oxford Dictionary is pretty reliable, and they say that a database is a structured set of data held in a computer, especially one that is accessible in various ways. That's a pretty broad definition, and it needs to be because there are many different types of databases, but for our purposes, that's going to be the AdventureWorks database that we installed in the last video. Basically, a database is just a collection of data that I would say, from my experience, is usually, but not always, related, as in the data and the objects that support that data within a database typically pertain to some general concept, although that doesn't have to be the case. But in the broadest possible sense, that Oxford Dictionary definition does the trick. So what's the difference between a SQL database and a SQL Server instance? So you may have noticed when we logged into SQL Server, and I'll go ahead and, even though I'm already logged in, I'll just connect to the server to show you that dialog box again. You may have noticed that it prompts us to connect to a server and gives us a server name. Now this is not a database. This is a database server. So when we click connect here, we're not connecting to a particular database. We're really connecting to essentially a service that the databases that we interact with kind of live on. You could think of this as almost like a hosting service for databases. And that's why if you click this plus sign next to databases, you'll actually see multiple databases that live on just this one server. So again, think of it like if you've ever dealt with website development, you know that there is a web server that can host one or more websites. A database server is similar in that it can host one or more databases. Now, some of these databases will be system databases, which are used by the server itself for internal operations. Now, as an analyst, you're rarely, if ever, going to have to deal with those. I never have in my career, and I've been doing this for a long time. Just to show you examples, those would be system databases right here. Again, these are used for internal operations within the database. The database server itself uses these databases to kind of run itself. So you're probably never going to have to interact with these. If you were a database administrator, maybe, but as an analyst, you probably won't. So where does the actual data that we'll be playing with live? This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the thing that we're going to be dealing with 99% of the time. It's in tables. Now, in a relational database like AdventureWorks, and I say here, don't worry about what relational means just yet. You're going to be hearing that word a lot, but for now, just accept AdventureWorks is a relational database. A table is a collection of data about a particular thing, and it's generally considered good database design practice to make that thing as specific as possible. You don't want a table that kind of pertains to a lot of different things and all that data is in one place. That's generally considered poor design, although there are cases where exceptions are made for good reasons. And that data is organized into rows and columns. Now, as a data analyst or a data scientist, the vast majority of your time that you spend interacting with a database is probably going to involve tables. So the best way to explain tables is just to take a look at a table. So we're actually going to dig into a table in the AdventureWorks database. And this will also help us get comfortable with navigating SQL Server Management Studio. So the general theme you see in this Object Explorer, which will always be on your left in Management Studio, is there are a series of items listed and then typically a plus sign to the left of the item. And if you click the plus sign, that branch of the tree expands, and now you have even more subcategories with plus signs next to them. So if you click, we'll collapse databases, so we're back at the start. So first you click the plus sign next to databases, and that shows you all the databases available on our server. We are interested in AdventureWorks 2019, so we click the plus sign next to that to expand it. And now we see a list of categories of things that live in the AdventureWorks database. Now, even though there's a lot of these, again, tables are the category that we're going to be using the vast majority of the time. So let's go ahead and click that plus sign. And now you'll see a lot of tables. And as many tables as this looks like, I can tell you in the wild, your average database is actually going to have a lot more than this. This is probably on the low end in terms of number of tables. So just that's something that you'll get used to. But a lot of production databases that support large applications may have hundreds, if not thousands, of tables. So to get an idea of what a table looks like, all you have to do is right-click that table and then choose Select Top 1000 Rows, left-click that, and boom, SQL Server Management Studio magically writes code that is executed by the database to select the first 1,000 rows from that table. And as you can see, the data is organized into columns, each of which has a certain piece of information about that particular entity, and then rows, each of which represent an instance of something. So if you have a table about addresses, each row is going to pertain to a single address, and then each column is going to say something descriptive about that address. Well, what's the first line of the address? What's the second line of the address? What's the city in the address? Etc., etc. And that same pattern would hold true for any of the other tables that we could select from here. So while we didn't write this code ourselves, if you had written it this exact way and executed it, the output would have been the same. Right-clicking a table and choosing Select Top 1000 Rows is really just a shortcut that is really handy much of the time to get a quick sneak peek, a preview into what a table looks like. So you may have noticed that the tables all have these little prefixes. And many of them have the same prefix. You have a lot of different tables, but you have fewer unique prefixes. There's person.personphone, person.phone number type. Then there's this production prefix. So what's up with that? What is that prefix? Well, these prefixes indicate the schema that those tables belong to. Now, a schema is basically a collection of database objects, which includes tables as well as some other types of objects we haven't covered yet, that just logically make sense being grouped together. So, for example, the AdventureWorks tables pertaining to people are organized under the person schema. And if we scroll up here, you see person.address, person.address type, person.person, person.password. Any table that has data that describes this specific thing that could kind of be more broadly categorized as pertaining to a person goes under the person schema. Now, who makes the decision as to how tables are organized into schemas and what schemas there should even be? That is really a judgment call. That is something that the person who designs and builds the database will decide as they're doing that, and that may change over time. For now, just think of it as a logical way of organizing, of making sense of the vast number of objects that live in a typical database. So that's all we're going to cover for this video. This has kind of been more of a theoretical topic rather than getting our hands dirty, other than using that little cool shortcut to pull the first 1,000 rows from a table. But in the next video, we're actually going to start writing code to pull data from these tables. Looking forward to that, and I'll see you then.